He's paying you to be here, isn't he? See, I know how this works. Awesome. Well, welcome to the final session of today. We are glad that you're here. We're going to be talking about, I don't want to say skeletons in the closet, but just behind the curtain kind of look at kind of esports activations and partnerships and kind of how to work together with brands and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Greg to introduce yourself and your panelists. And also, if you have any questions, please use the app. You'll get notified near the end of this as well to remind you. But Greg, take it away.
Thank you. All right, hey, so I'll let you guys introduce yourselves first. So Johnny, why don't you start us off here?
Okay. I'm Johnny Ward. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Damage, the esports agency. Prior to Damage, I owned and was the co-founder of 2 boutique integrated marketing agencies. And I've also opened up the West Coast offices for 2 East Coast-based marketing agencies. And our clients included Verizon, Ubisoft, and Electronic Arts.
All right. Brian.
My name is Brian. Glad to be here. I'm a co-founder and COO at Damage. I've spent a good chunk of my career on video games and technology, most recently involved in a mobile startup involving Bitcoin and crypto in the earlier days, and spent some time as a high-level gamer. I mean, we threw the term professional gamer pretty loosely 12 years ago, but yeah, I've been around the space for a while, and here I am today. Yeah.
He was a gamer before you got rich from doing it. Too early.
All right, yeah, my name is Greg Jacobone, and I spent most of my career at Verizon Wireless. I had the Western US marketing responsibility, and recently left there, and I've been teaching college courses as well as doing some independent consulting, mostly with brands and then a little bit with some agencies as well. All right, so I'll kick off the first question. So Damage is considered to be one of the top agencies in esports. Can you maybe just tell us a little bit about what you guys do?
Let me take this. Yeah, so basically what we do is we basically we're an esports marketing agency, and we turn esports enthusiasts into loyal customers of our client brands. So basically we inspire these gamers to really embrace non-endemic and endemic brand clients that we have as very valuable allies to their community.
And I'd like to add one thing that I do believe that gives us an advantage or sets us apart is our leadership group. So in addition to Johnny and myself, we have a pretty good balance of folks who come from the agency world and understand brand marketing, as well as people that understand gaming from the grassroots level as esports professionals and team owners and captains, as well as number 2 executives from some of the world's largest and most recognizable game developers. So one of our co-founders, he came up as a pro gamer. He was the owner and captain of the #1 TF2 team in the world for 3 years running, and then he went off to run the largest esports program for a system integrator in North America. Another one of our co-founders was the chief operating officer at Blizzard. He started there when the company was valued at, I think, what, 8-10 million at the time of his departure. He left it at 8 billion. And this gives us a really good understanding of how brands should be moving into space from the perspective of a global publisher, as well as us little guys in the bottom that are playing competitively. So it gives us good perspective.
Yeah, what's interesting is that coming from the brand side, that what we used to see is that our traditional agencies just follow the money. And on the Verizon side, what I saw was that, especially when social started, it's all your traditional agencies started, hey, we've got social expertise, and so they'd hire 1 or 2 people, and then they'd start pitching that. You guys are a little bit different because you are really bottoms up, and this is your world. You've started there. You're not, adapting to it, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe you can just tell us a little bit about why esports are just so crazy right now.
Okay. I'll take that one. So it's interesting because there's a variety of reasons why esports is exploding right now, and I think you can kind of take it back almost a century, because number 1, it's an entirely new sport, and that's super exciting for people. So in the 1950s, people finally brands were looking at professional traditional sports as a great vehicle to market their brand. And then in the 1990s, so it was an entirely new sport. In the 1990s, it was the action sports. So brands really started embracing action sports as being that killer vehicle to hit their target demographic. And now in the 2010s, and even more, probably more 2015, you have esports, an entirely new sport. People are super excited about, obviously, but it really is yet another vehicle to harness this new generation of hyper-consuming individuals, typically between 15 to 35.
Yeah, and video games is, I think, the largest form of entertainment in the world. It's larger than television, film, music, and with the advent of technology, broadband, streaming platforms, it really gives these gamers a platform to share their content, to create content, to compete, and really interact with video games that they never were able to in the past. And I think that gives us a lot of insight into who they really are, how they like to consume media, where they spend their time, and ultimately present. And that in itself is an opportunity for these brands to get in front of these gamers who've always been there, but never really had understood the right outlets in which to reach them. So.
Yeah, Johnny, you mentioned action sports. One of the things coming from the brand side that we did, and Verizon obviously spends a ton of money on the big investments and sponsorships and things like that. And what we did was we carved out a smaller budget just to start on action sports that enabled us to really prove it out, show some easy wins, good metrics to come back to sell people who were much more in alignment with traditional sports, and realize that, hey, there's actually something here we got to invest in. I feel like this is the same in where we are today with esports. If I'm a big brand and maybe my senior leadership doesn't necessarily get it, you obviously, if you're here, you know this, but it's your opportunity to really prove something out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they're really, when we launched our agency in 2016, we were passionate about the space, and it really wasn't making that much money as an agency. And now, with a lot of things, as something comes into vogue, you have those people that are focused on it because they're passionate about it and they're actually really good at it. Fortunately, we found ourselves in that position, but it's really, we put two categories of brands. It's either the brands that are very close to spending money and they're actively researching it, and some of you are here today that I've met earlier, and then on the other half, you're actively spending. There's probably another third category, which is you're actively losing money. And that's what we want to talk about today, is some missteps maybe that some brands have made in the past that all brands should avoid. We'll get into that.
Okay. So with that, then maybe we can just talk about what the brands need to know about esports today.
Yeah. There's so, well, first of all, and then I'm going to hand it to you, Brian, we all know how fragmented and just ridiculously confusing gaming and esports is. There's different gaming genres, game titles, developers, streamers, influencers, and all those micro demographics that are corresponding to those particular assets. So there's a lot to know about esports for a brand, but I would say for today's purposes, we could probably split that into three different categories. One is understanding gamer mentality. I know you got something.
Yeah, understanding gamer mentality, I think, is an interesting one, because we hear the word, you have to be authentic, you have to understand who they are, and esports is like, if you have to activate in the right way, it's unforgiving. As we evolved as an agency, we view that term in a completely different way. So for instance, when we look at a piece of OLA that we're executing for on behalf of a brand client, we're asking ourselves, how does the creative and the copy line up to what we're trying to sell, right? I'm going to take this back to our leadership. So one of our chief creative officer actually spent his entire career building video games that most of you in this room has probably played. He's worked for Ubisoft, Blizzard, and even NetEase. So as a concept artist leading creative teams building these worlds and characters, he understands what these gamers want to see and how they want to interact with the worlds. And we leverage that exact same methodology when we're pumping out our creative assets. It's when you're looking at video gaming, you have three main things. You have the content, the platform, PC or console, and then you have the player. You remove one of those things, then the whole thing crumbles. So we apply that thinking when we're thinking of POP, retail, or OLA, is how do we communicate a product that could be either endemic or non-endemic to the space, while leveraging video game creative to draw their attention. That's first, and then speak and use words that they're used to seeing, whether they're used to seeing in the video games that they play. Maybe it's their own vernacular that they use, but we think like a game developer when we're approaching marketing, and that's kind of how I view that question.
Yeah, in the previous session upstairs too, Ryan even said too, like what music you choose is really important, because if you choose the wrong one, then obviously you're not relevant, you're not authentic anymore either. And I think, coming from the brand side, when your traditional agency says that they will put something together, they don't understand these nuances, and then you end up doing something that's not authentic, which is then really works against you.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's understanding that gamer mentality, and as the global gaming and esports agency of record for Intel, and we handle all of their global creative and their global content and strategy, one of the things that we have to ensure is that all of our creative needs to breed familiarity. You don't want to have a polarizing look in your creative that, even though it might win some awards on the side, it won't resonate with the actual gamers and esports enthusiasts and fanatics, which is what they were trying to reach in the first place. So that's super important to know that. A number two, so understand gamer mentality. Number two would be stay consistent, but stay flexible in the space.
Yeah, that's a good point. So to find success in anything, right, we have to commit to it. And that especially rings true for esports and esports marketing. I think in the last, 18 months, 24 months, we've seen the rise and fall of some games that we thought, this is it, this is the one, right? We saw H1Z1 come and go, PUBG, Fortnite, and things change, things happen, and I think a lot of larger brands that commit to a spend in the space, they don't approach it in a way where we're gonna fail forward and learn. It's esports is a scary thing. My job is on the line. I never got fired for buying media on Facebook, but my boss doesn't even know what video gaming is, so I'm very careful of how I spend my money. And I think understanding that just because you don't see a return on a spend in this particular area of esports, being ready to be flexible and just kind of go with the flow as esports move super fast is something super important. So commit but be flexible.
Yeah, and one of the examples is Subaru. So we had a client activation for them. What we did was an online tournament for CS:GO, Counter-Strike Global Offensive, and it worked out really well. What were the concurrents on that?
So the Subaru Invitational was actually unique in that it was probably the first auto brand to host, not sponsor, to host their own tournament. And we had a lot of doubts from internal and external stakeholders going in. What does cars have anything to do with video gaming, right? But we went for it, and I think it was pretty successful. Our max concurrents were 67,000 at one point, vast majority of which coming from North America. And the thing to learn here is that, Subaru was very hesitant in spending a dime with us. But after we did our recap, they learned that, sure, you gave us, for numbers' sake, you gave us $100,000, but the return that you got in media spend was probably 4 times that when we're talking about, click-through rate, new followers to your social channels. They would have spent $500,000 spending in traditional media to get that same impacts. So I think as marketers, that's how you have to look at it. And unfortunately, right now, if you look at the data coming from Twitch or whatever platforms you're looking at, especially Twitch, it's very weak. I want to know where my viewership is. North America, great. Where in North America and who are they? They don't tell you that, right? So brand marketers need that kind of data, and unfortunately, this could be a plus, but doing your own tournament that you own or own activation where you have direct access to that data is probably the best way to figure out where you stand and what your benchmarks are and build from there. So
yeah, so understand gaming mentality, stay consistent in the space, but stay flexible. And the third one would most likely be engage now. For brands that are considering it, and even for brands that are actively spending money but trialing it, the point is you need to engage now. We are on the ground floor of a spectacular new paradigm of how people view sports, and it has absolutely no chance of dying down or even slowing down just because of the speed of communication and the advancement of technology making these games, which will probably evolve into a much more VR and AR platform, so much more popular and so much more engaging. So those would probably be the 3.
Okay. Yeah, I think something you said just, and I kind of touched on it earlier, but finding an opportunity to do something, so whether it's, sponsoring a tournament or whatever, something where you can test it, get in now, do it, be successful, drive some really strong metrics that will compare against other metrics and basically show that, hey, I can make my boss look really smart by investing here and doing the right thing. So, good
Absolutely.
stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know we've got questions online. I want to see if we've got any available yet. If not, go ahead and pop some in the app, and we'll be happy to answer them.
Cool.
Go ahead.
So other examples, because sometimes it's nice to hear some examples of what's happening with what's going on in the branding world. There was another example of Area 15 as another client, for example. Has anyone heard of Area 15 in Las Vegas? Yeah, a couple people. MGM's here, so I was talking it over with Lavelle earlier. But Area 15 is opening in February 2020. It's an entertainment complex. It's the anti-mall, anti-strip. And what they were looking for is they want to hit that 15 to 35-year-old demographic to bring them to this fantastic entertainment complex that includes Meow Wolf, if there's art directors in the audience. I know there's a couple. And so they engaged us. So now we're on a retainer with them to figure out how to do that. And one of the ways that we're going to move forward with them is to create a festival that is a gaming and esports, a true gaming and esports festival. There's one that should be happening soon, I believe, in Las Vegas. Ours will most likely be happening in 9 months. But right now, what you see is a lot of gaming and esports just bolted on to something existing because it's like, well, we got to do gaming and esports if we're having a music festival because this demographic wants to see that. And it's very odd and it's inauthentic and it's very glaringly obvious that it wasn't in their original plans. So what we want to do with this particular client is we're going to build something that is gaming with a music festival added onto it. So it's just one solution to a particular client of what's happening out there in the world of how to engage different kinds of brands, whether they be products or services or different hospitality venues.
Yeah, and to your point of being authentic, that kind of reminded me of another point that I wanted
And
to
nobody's
make
heard
earlier.
that term, right? Authentic in esports.
So I mean, people in advertising and marketing, have heard the term like "live the client brand," right? And that especially rings true with this space because you have to live both worlds. Both as a gamer or as a streamer, understanding it, natively, so that you can speak on behalf of your client brand to that audience in a way that it needs to be heard. So for instance, we do a lot of work with Intel, and as you guys know, they make very technical products, and distilling that down into a way that a gamer can understand and consume it in just a few seconds, that presents a challenge in itself. So when I hear that term, or people wanting to get into esports, do you truly understand both worlds as you're marrying this one world with gaming and esports, right? So
yeah, it's interesting, and that's what we're finding too, is that you mentioned this, and this isn't a slide against other agencies, but what we're finding is that brands are now realizing that they have an agency of record for every expertise, whether it's the Olympics, action sports, experiential, digital, social, PR, you name the marketing category, and every big global brand has their AOR for that particular ones. But there's no gaming and esports AOR category yet, and so with Intel coming aboard with us, we're their AOR for gaming and esports. What we're finding is that now that's becoming an actual term because it is authentic, and that's what they're looking for. They're not looking for somebody who understands traditional sports and how to market at the Super Bowl and the playoffs or MLB or whatever. They're looking for someone that is going to know how to market to a particular type of sport, competitive video gaming, that lives primarily online, which is completely different than what a traditional sports would be. So, be authentic.
Okay, got it. Authentic. Okay, so first question from an anonymous source. Can you talk about some examples of how brands have unsuccessfully tried to enter the space?
There's a few of them out there, but I think I'll answer that question by saying there are ways that brands unsuccessfully enter. I'm not going to pick out one brand, just to point them out, but a lot of brands like to hedge their bets. They hear tournaments are popular, streamers are popular, and teams are popular, and they do a blanket spend without very much direction. A lot of these entities themselves are not experts in marketing or brand activation, and I think that's been a lot of, there's been a lot of heartburn on both sides of, the marketer and whoever's being sponsored, and what are we going to do with these dollars? And it's a lot of times they're kind of in flux. Streamers, teams, they're very sponsor revenue dependent to pay their bills. That's the reality of the situation. But they're really not seeing eye to eye on the same page. So how brands have unsuccessfully answered, that's exactly it. Let's throw money at something and hope we see a return without a subject matter expert on the matter that lives on both sides.
Yeah,
So.
and whether it's Damage or whether it's another agency that truly understands gaming and esports, the best thing to do is actually, have that professional opinion of how to target this very nuanced crowd that could be very fickle in the beginning if you're not reading it correctly.
Yeah, I know from the brand side, it can be very confusing whether it's a league, it's a tournament, it's a athlete, or how do I get involved?
Streamer,
and
player,
so,
yeah.
I mean, it just gets very complicated, and this is even more complicated than in previous examples that you mentioned. So
Yeah.
okay, so let me see. Do you see esports as a loss leader for other revenue streams? How do your brands measure ROI? I think you touched on the ROI a little bit earlier on the media side.
Yeah, I don't think I see esports as a loss leader for other revenue streams, but measuring ROI, it's a lot of the off-the-shelf tools right now aren't robust enough to really drill, because Twitch right now is one of our biggest data sources in terms of what the community is doing, and what their API gives us access to is very limited. So a lot of the way that our brands measure ROI is homegrown. So we have in-house tools that we use that is loaded with source data that's given directly from the client, their sales numbers, and it's really a challenge to try to attribute, dollars to marketing activities that we're doing. So each client is different, each brand is different, but at the end of the day, it's a lot of focus groups, it's a lot of surveys, but it's dependent on that source data that they give us, and find ways to get creative on attributing that to sales.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's always different with ROI. Like, for example, Intel, their ROI is done through a massive number of surveys that have very specific questions, and they'll ask that through periodic times throughout the year. And that's, it almost seems very analog, but that actually is a way that some of these global companies are
and how we
measuring.
define ROI in this case, a lot of brands that are playing is ROI on, like, am I building brand equity, right? If I'm activating in the Overwatch League or at ESL, is my logo prominent? Like, ROI can be defined in many different ways. And I think the players that are spending a lot in this space, they're not yet concerned with the monetary ROI. They're more concerned with, let's get in now, let's build the brand, and let's set ourselves as leaders in this space, and then worry about the money stuff later. So, like.
Yeah, so coming from the brand side, I think I would hit it by two ways. There's one, which is what you just said, which is a little bit more, it feels like the right thing, smart. But then what I would always have to do is justify relative to other investments. So if I know my budget is X, and I'm going to take a percentage of that budget and assign it to esports, I need to be able to say my cost per whatever. I know we talked about metrics upstairs a little while ago, but I'm going to compare that to some other asset that I would be able to leverage. So whether it's an impression, a click, or it's an eyeball, or whatever the case may be. So I would just basically line the two up, and that's how I'm going to be able to justify it to whoever's upstream for me. It's like, okay, is the ROI or the cost per better in this asset versus another asset? So, and then of course there's the strategic element which you're talking about, which is this is the right place to be now for future growth.
Right.
Cool. Let's see. Okay, so which category do you see as the best fit for esports marketing? QSRs, I think that's quick service restaurants, retail, tech, CPG.
So I think we're seeing the most success with tech and CPG. There are certain categories in CPG that are doing, exceptionally well. Others, not so well. But for instance, like, I think we're going to start to see a rise in nutrition. I think that's going to be, as these gamers are treated as athletes, they have their trainers and nutritionists. They are promoting more of a healthy lifestyle. We're going to see a lot of that. Obviously, Red Bull is killing in the space. There are very endemic brands like your Mountain Dews, your Doritos out there. Retail, I haven't seen a whole lot of retail success. I think we all know, especially to this demographic, retail is a dying industry, right? Anything brick and mortar. But
The one thing I would say on retail, so for anybody who saw the Walmart presentation this morning, I actually thought they were doing some really interesting stuff. I mean, they're pretty committed. Obviously, they've invested significant amount of capital in those locations. Very kind of interesting way of trying to do something very unique to this space, which I thought was pretty cool. And it's authentic too in terms of how they've done it. So I think that was a good example of, okay, if you are in retail, that might be a way to do it.
Sell an experience, right? They can't get anywhere else.
Yeah. Are you talking about Walmart?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, number one, what is it, Fortune 1 right now? Yeah. And they have the money to do it, and they're doing it properly, right? Other categories, yeah, definitely tech and CPG, but what we're finding is that every category, if you're targeting the 15 to 35-year-old demographic, you should be spending, or you will be spending money in gaming and esports. It's just a matter of time. It's just like you'll probably be spending some money in traditional sports if you're going 15 to 35-year-old demographic, probably spending money in the music category. You're going to be spending money in gaming and esports. So while tech and CPG are definitely something that we're seeing more clients, engage us, quick service restaurants, obviously, that makes sense. There's a bit of a paradigm, I think, an old paradigm of the kid in the basement. We've all heard it as the gamers, and that is, to us, maybe on the inside, I think everybody's kind of seeing that as a pretty antiquated paradigm right now, right? So even though QSR is definitely going to be sticking around, Jack in the Box is with Dallas Fuel for Overwatch team. We are seeing a turn towards the more healthy options. In fact, we went to Beijing for meetings, and one of those was a major global nutritional company, supplement company that is inches away from spending a lot of investment in the space.
And having bootstrapped their agency, we're the kings of test and learns. That's how we had to survive in the early days. So whatever industry you're from, come talk to us. We probably have a case study lying around for whatever industry you're in. So.
That actually ties, I think, to this one question on the bottom here, which is average budget you're seeing brands spending. So maybe you can touch on not only the average budget for brands that are really kind of already established and committed, but also what people should be thinking about if they're thinking about budgeting for a trial or an initiative within the category.
Okay, so what's the average budget? There is no average budget. It's so across the board. It could be 5 figures, and it could be a lot more than that with some particular clients. I think the answer to this question, and maybe I'm dovetailing away from it, but it's there for any budget. As long as you're having a strategic approach and leveraging those dollars correctly, any budget can be effective in reaching this gaming and esports enthusiast audience.
And to your point, just to help folks, because we've learned a lot from operating our own company, and the budgets can be minuscule. I'm not saying that to shoot ourselves in the foot, but we're exploring different ways of how to bring up, educate clients on how to invest in esports, and as simple as a white paper. Mm-hmm. So I've read pretty much every white paper out there, and none of them are very good, to be honest. I believe a white paper should be something where at the end of it, you could actually put that to work and see some type of return on your own, but the goal is I'm going to call this person back and do it for real. So, it's as simple as picking up a white paper for a couple $1,000s and trying it on your own. So at the very minimum, that's it right there. But some of the brands that do a legitimate test and learn that actually walk away with something that works, I'd say we've seen 300, 250 seems like what they're throwing.
Yeah, to pick an average, yeah. The Subaru Invitational, we'll just be open and honest, that was $100,000 with 67,000 concurrent and a whole lot of other social media. We have T-Mobile. We're doing activations at T-Mobile with gaming and esports that are in the tens of thousands. So it's just a matter of specific activations. So it really just depends on what the objective is and how deep you want to go into it and where you are at in the transition of, I'm kind of thinking about esports to, all right, I'm ready to dive in. This makes sense.
Okay. I think based on the blue screen, that means we're out of time. So thank you, and I guess we'll wrap up. So.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Let's give you guys a round of applause. Let's snag a picture, too. Let's get a picture. No, Greg, come back. No, Brian, come here. We gotta take a picture. There's a camera guy right here. I don't think there's a